Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 35 of the Hot Path Show. I'm Johnny, and today I'm joined in by Danny. Welcome in, Danny. How's it going today?
It's going amazing.
As amazing as it can be, and of course, we got to
Exactly.
play the classic Danny producer track here.
Oh yeah,
Now, special development. We got one for me.
Run that back turbo. Run that back turbo. Run that back turbo.
what the fuck?
Run it
Now we
back,
need one for
Turbo.
Tobias.
I know. Yeah, we got to get the Tobias producer tag, or maybe we'll just like play some Avicii or something like that.
Yeah. It would be easier if it was like I don't know, Ludacris or who else mentions the name all the
Luda.
time.
We got
uh,
another one in here from episode 21. Tobias,
we
we
just
gotta
need to find some Swedish music. That must be something.
exactly. That's what I'm saying. Just play a little Avicii, call it a
Little
day.
Avicii, little Swedish House Mafia, little take what's it called? Backstreet Boys. Um, Martin, what's his name? There's like a famous producer who produced a lot of Swedish music, and he's from Sweden.
Okay,
So like if you listen to Justin Timberlake or Beyonce, chances are it's made by this Swedish dude.
interesting. They know their music out there in Sweden.
Yeah, apparently so. I mean, they also have won Eurovision. I don't know how many times.
Well, I guess this kind of like rolls into our little warm up topic that I had here today. Oh, by the way, I should mention actually a couple things at the top before we get into this. We're pre recording this episode, so unfortunately, we're not going to be live here today. Likely, I will be hanging around in the chat. If anyone has any comments, feel free to chat, ask any questions, anything like that. And then also, I do want to mention that the main topic of today, it's going to be a little bit of a kind of free-flowing one. I just kind of have a couple questions about Unity ECS API stuff for Danny, and he's going to be helping us through some of that stuff. And then we're just going to kind of see where things takes us and see just kind of where the conversation goes. So I think it should be like a fun, free-flowing conversation about some of the inner workings of Unity ECS. So yeah, how does that all sound to you?
I mean, pretty good. I'm a little scared of what I have to come up with on the spot, but we'll see.
Ah, you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
Yes, I would assume so.
Yeah, so anyways, let's go ahead and get into our little warm-up topic here today. So I wanted to ask you about so your name, Daniel Kierkegaard Anderson.
Hmm.
So Kierkegaard, that's Tobias was telling me this is like some special name. There was some like important person who had this name, and like you can only have it as your name if you're like directly within the lineage. So what's kind of the story behind all this?
So yeah, no, it's a famous guy called Søren Kierkegaard, or I've heard Americans call it Soren
Okay.
instead of Søren, but Søren Kierkegaard was like known for something in philosophy called existentialism. I don't quite know what it is about actually, which is kind of funny, but his name is spelled in a certain way. Kierkegaard is a quite common name, but Kierkegaard with an old school spelling with an E in the name and like a double A is not very common.
Okay.
And in Denmark, there's so many rules on names. There's so like there's
Really?
who. Yeah, no, that's a discussion in itself. But one of them is that for the most part, you there are some names that are protected that you can only get if it's part of your family lineage. One of which is Kierkegaard with that spelling, not the other Kierkegaard, but Kierkegaard with this spelling.
Okay.
Because he's a person of significance in that way. But in that lineage, is somehow must be me because otherwise I wouldn't be able to have the same name with the same spelling, which is kind of fun.
Interesting. So does that come from your mom's side or your dad's side?
My mom, uh,
Okay.
yeah, and obviously it's not, a descendant of his because he didn't have any kids. So it has to be, some cousin, brother, whatever.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So it's not a direct descendant of him, but it's still from his family.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, but nobody really has a family tree to be able to look at it and track it back. So hard to know for sure.
Yeah, no, that was interesting because yeah, Tobias was telling me that like I don't know, he said it was some like king or something like that, but
Oh no, it was different. I'm not aware of any king called Kierkegaard. I mean Kierkegaard specifically means graveyard.
bro, really,
Yeah. Kirke is church and gård is garden.
so
So what is
church
the garden?
garden,
Yeah,
it's gonna
exactly.
end up
That is the graveyard. Yeah.
interesting. That's a little grim, but kind of badass at the same time.
Yes. My name is Daniel Graveyard Anderson. And obviously the fun part there is also Anderson is there's a very famous writer with the name Anderson in the name. You likely know this person.
Is
Or at
it
least his tales.
Mr. Anderson?
Mr. I don't think that's what people call him generally.
Do you know what that's from though?
No.
Have you ever seen The Matrix?
You know, a lot of people are gonna shoot me for this, but I haven't. It's on my list, but I still haven't. No.
You should because Neo, he's I forget what his first name is, but his last name is Anderson. You know, the main character Keanu
Oh,
Reeves.
yeah.
And then so the like kind of main bad guy always refers to him as Mr. Anderson.
Oh no! Oh, that's
So-
why people keep saying that to me.
You're gonna love it.
Yeah, I've definitely heard people say Mr. Anderson like that before. So I'm sure they were referring to that.
Anyways, who is the famous author?
Do you know the story of the Ugly Duckling?
Yeah.
And the Little Mermaid. And,
Of course, yeah.
What is the name of the story that the princess from Let It Go is based on?
Princess from Let It Go. Oh, Frozen?
Yeah, I mean Frozen was inspired by a Danish story from the same author. So
Oh, okay. I probably wouldn't know the original source material of Frozen.
but it's I think it's called like the Snipprinsessen, the Snow Princess.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's the author H.C. Andersen.
H.C. Anderson.
H.C. Andersen in Danish. Which sounds
Now-
a lot like I'm saying Jose Anderson.
Oh, that's a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
So now you're not necessarily from that family, but it's just kind of a. is that more
No.
of a-
Anderson is actually a very, very common name here.
Okay.
So not with an O, but
Okay,
Anderson.
so you have two common names, but one of them is the uncommon version of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And they both happen to map directly to roughly the same time area of famous people.
Oh, interesting.
So
like when-
H.C.
yeah,
Andersen and Søren Kierkegaard lived around like 1800s. So
interesting. That's cool. So is that a common thing that a lot of Danish people do? Is they'll have both last names like as part of their kind of name that they go by?
yeah, I mean it's very common in Denmark for a kid to take the name of both of their parents, and then they, one parent picks which of the two names, and the other one picks the other two. So they, each have two, and then they pick which one they want to carry down.
Oh, okay.
So they each get one pick out of the two that they have.
Interesting. And so is it not really common for like when two people get married that like, one person will change the last name so they basically have the same last name?
Oh no,
now?
that happens as well. So if originally there's four names, right, to pick between, and then
Yeah.
and then after marriage it's they merge, and then they only have two names, and that's generally what the kid also gets. But it's the same
Okay.
naming scheme. So if they haven't been married yet and then get a kid, they will choose a similar naming scheme as if they were married and then did that combination.
Interesting. So not to dox you too much, but do your parents basically have the same Kierkegaard Anderson last name?
do they have to say? No, they like one of them has Kierkegaard, and then other one has Andersen.
Okay, so they didn't both change their last name to Kierkegaard Anderson.
Oh, they did for a while. And,
Okay.
but she was divorced. Then my mom got divorced, and then changed
Oh,
her name
okay,
again
okay.
when she got remarried. So yeah, no, she has a different last name, I suppose.
Last
Because Andersen,
name.
yeah, she still has Kierkegaard in the name.
Got to keep the Kierkegaard.
Exactly.
Interesting. I'm learning so much stuff about Danish and Swedish culture on this show. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, I can, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I normally learn a lot about American culture just because that's where most media is from.
Whereas, yeah, this is all new to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of crimies. What's it called? Like a drama series based on like a thriller.
Okay.
It's known as a krimi.
Krimi.
Yeah. For like criminal. So it's like a criminal investigation. That's very, very popular here.
Right.
You would, for instance, call the series Dexter a krimi.
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 It's funny how those kind of like a couple of those words that like are kind of like you kind of see the origin of like an English word from Danish word. Like the classic one that you showed me earlier this year was Thor's Day.
Oh yeah.
The day of Thor. So we are actually recording this on Thor's Day.
Yes, we are. Thursday. And that's why in Danish it's called Torsdag,
Thor's
which
Day.
sounds a little more similar to Thor.
Right, as opposed
Which is
to
the name of the god.
TH. Oh, okay.
Thor is how we say fall.
Uh-huh. I see. And then we say Thor, so we have Thursday.
Okay, the tail. Very high definition. Tail.
Waving hello. She's
There you go. So you just wanted to say hi, I suppose.
Now, does your cat have the last name Kierkegaard Anderson?
I don't think my cat has any last name. It only has a first name.
What's the first name again?
Senna.
Senna. That's right.
Yeah, spelled with a Z. Originally, it was a League of Legends character back when I still played the game.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the character is still there from what I'm aware, but I just haven't played it in years at this point.
Yeah, it's been a very long time since I've played it. Probably over 10 years.
But I mean, I still follow all the world's music because, oh my god, I love the music that comes out of the World's Championship.
The music?
Yeah, do you not know that every year they have like a World's Championship, and for it they have like a big production music?
Wow, I had no idea. I mean, I
They,
know that they
uh,
have like a ton of money and they can do whatever they want, like in all kinds of cool things, like make their own music for every world event.
Yeah, no, it's and it's not like unknown artists either. Like I'm sure you might know some of the world songs. Let me see if I can find a list so I can. There we go. Yeah, they're called world anthems.
And so this like ties in with like their world tournament, basically.
Exactly, and so normally they will have like an animated video, which is like a fairly high production animation that like tries to both have the singers represented as well as like players in the game, like popular players.
Oh, cool. Okay.
In the tournament. In 2016, it was a set with a song called Ignite. Warriors from Imagine Dragons. Rise Gods. Legends Never Die. There's quite a few, but the one from this year is from a band that just got reunited. Can you guess which one?
Linkin Park.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. No, the new World song is from Linkin Park.
Hilarious.
Yeah, and it's even on their new album.
Okay, is it good?
It is really good. It's called The Heavy is the Crown.
The Heaviest Crown?
Heavy is the Crown.
Oh, The Heaviest Crown would be kind of a cool name.
Heavy is the Crown is also a good name, I feel like.
Yeah, Heavy is the Crown's pretty good too.
Yeah. And obviously it's like also has a more meaning than Heaviest Crown.
Yeah, true. Cool.
Yeah, no,
I'll have to look into
I
that.
really love their new album. It's so good. It's
Yeah?
yeah, no. The new album is called From Zero, so it's like the new song is Heavy is the Crown and The Emptiness Machine, and then they haven't released it yet, the rest yet. So I'm excited for the 15th of November. Yeah.
Okay.
Finally releases.
Coming up, month and a half.
Yeah.
I'll have to listen to it. Because, yeah, I don't think I've listened to any of the new songs since they got the new singer.
Wow. Well, you should
Yeah.
definitely try giving it a listen.
Yeah. Yeah. no, definitely.
It sounds extremely Linkin Park. They haven't changed their style at all. It's very wild to see, considering it's not Chester Bennington anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Cool. Well, I will check that out for sure. So yeah, we've got a couple miscellaneous announcements to get into. So real quickly, I do just want to mention that we have been nominated for a Unity Award for Best Live Streamer. I don't know if voting is still actually going to be available when this video goes live, because I saw some people online saying that today was like the last day to vote, or maybe it ends up being tomorrow. But otherwise, it sounds like we have limited time to vote in the Unity Awards. So yeah, go ahead and check them out. We're part of the Community Awards for Best Live Streamer. And then there are a bunch of other awards for different, available and upcoming games and other random things like that. So definitely go check that out. And then, so they're going to be announcing the winners on the live stream later this month on October 23rd. So we'll look forward to that. So, that is in a couple weeks here. Let's see. Also, I do want to mention that next week is the JetBrains Game Dev Days 2024. And they have a bunch of different talks about some things related to different development in different game engines. And I'm going to be giving a talk at this event. It's actually the last talk of the event. So it's taking place at, it says 5 p.m. UTC, which is 7 p.m. Central European time. And that's also 10 a.m. Pacific time for all my fellow Americans over here. So it's called Why Dots is Unity's Silver Bullet, and kind of just wanted to give a little bit of an overview about, why I think Dots is such a great technology and why I think it's really important piece of the Unity game engine, and why I'm really glad that Unity is, continuing to integrate this deeper into their engine. So yeah, a lot of good, interesting topics on that, I think. And And I'll be sure to have a link down in the description for you to register it. It's a completely free event. It's all online. Well, actually, I think on the 9th, there's like an in-person event where they're actually having in-person talks at their offices in Munich and Amsterdam. So if you happen to live in those places, feel free to go to those if you'd like. And then on Thursday, the 10th, then it's going to be basically all online. Last year they were broadcasting on their YouTube channel, so I'm not sure if they're going to be doing the same thing this year. But definitely go check that out. And speaking of talks, do also want to mention that Unity has started posting their talks online on their YouTube channel. So if you go to the Unity's YouTube channel, you go to videos, you're not going to see...
It's so hidden. I'm so annoyed by this. I have spoken with them, and I think they might release it in a different way over time, but right now this is how they're doing it. And it's just hidden. It's so hidden. Basically, if you go to the videos tab, then you're not going to see the videos here.
So you have to go to playlists, and then there's actually two separate Unite playlists. So there's one called Unite 2024, and there's a Unite 2024 Barcelona. This one, I think all it has is the Unity Engine roadmap talk, which is, I believe, on the regular
That one is the
channel.
original.
Yeah, it's an important one to get out
goes
there.
This as well? Can you check if time goes this as well? Maybe that's what they're doing.
Oh yeah. Wait, no.
No.
Yeah. Nope. So
but it might be the next one released.
Yeah, it could be.
Because it might just be a slow roll that they're trying to do.
Right. So yeah. Anyways, go to the playlists tab, and then most of them are going to be in this Unite 2024
They
Barcelona.
want to create something very.
That's us.
Oh, whoa! I think I've seen those faces before.
Yeah. So if we go view full playlist, we'll close out of that. And then, so here are the talks that they have. Unfortunately, they don't have all the talks. So Danny, your talk is not in there yet.
No, I'm aware.
The other kind of main ECS talk, which was the ECS in City Skylines 2, that one is also not on there. And I know
waiting with the good stuff till last,
I know. And then actually there was one other talk that Tobias and I attended, which was kind of like a technical artist talk. That one is not up as well. However, there are still some good ones in here, like the Prince of Persia performance talk was in here. Let's see what other things are going on here. There's some of the AI things, which I definitely want to check out as well, just to kind of see what's going on over there. Some tooling stuff, BMW. Just a bunch of kind of random things in here. Oh, also I do want to point out this very last video here, this real-time careers meet for accomplished creators. Apparently, I am an accomplished creator.
Definitely.
So, this is me right here. So this is me, and this is Brian from Odin, from the Odin Inspector Odin. Not Odin
Not
language,
yeah.
or the god Odin. This was myself, Brian, and then two other creators who also kind of do some work within the industry. And so it was basically just kind of like a Q&A panel. So the majority of it, we were basically just kind of like, talking about, answering questions like, what's your day-to-day like? And, how'd you get into the industry and all these sorts of things. And then the last like quarter of it or so was we were kind of doing a little bit of like a Q&A section with the students who were in there. So yeah, it was a nice little thing. So that again is available for you to watch if you would like to. Any other thoughts on the Unite talks?
I mean, I can't wait to see them all out.
Yeah.
I've seen some of the footage of the one I did.
Okay.
It looks like they recorded it pretty good. I, for instance, didn't know that the cameras are manual, so they have to manually shift them around. So every time that Anna starts speaking, you can see the camera just like shifting over to her, and then when I start speaking, you can see it switching back to me.
Because there were a couple of times where you guys kind of like were bouncing back and forth between each other, right?
Yes, we were.
That's funny. Look forward to all of them. I wonder, do you know how many like total talks they had? Because I saw that they had 42 videos uploaded. I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good amount already. And then I know there's at least 3 missing, and then probably even more missing after that. So
I think on the session note, at least, the one where we went in and registered for every one of them.
Oh, yeah,
there was
yeah.
like 50 presentations. Like 50, 51. Definitely in the lower 50s.
67.
Whoa, no. Okay,
67.
Wait. 67. Okay, well, then there's still quite a lot that they are yet to release.
Yeah. So, yeah. Anyways, glad that they're, uploading these for everybody, because there's definitely a lot of good information in here. And, even when I was at the event, there were a whole bunch of ones that I wasn't able to make too. So I'm definitely going to be watching these myself over the coming weeks. So, very much looking forward to it. Are there any talks that you can think of off the top of your head that you really want to check out when it gets released, if it hasn't already?
I mean, I really want to ironically recheck the what's it called, City Skyline ECS one, because
Yeah.
while I did go to that one, I didn't really see that one because I was all the way in the back and oh.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
get
I
it.
really want to see it and especially be able to skim through it and dig for some gold nuggets if there is any.
Yeah.
Which supposedly from Tobias there should be plenty.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a good talk, but one that I would like to rewatch as well. But yeah, okay, so those are kind of our miscellaneous announcements for the week. And then, yeah, real quickly, do just want to remind you all that you can support us over on Patreon at patreon.com/TurboMaceGames. Should be a link to that down in the description below. Or if you'd prefer to support us over on YouTube through YouTube memberships, you can do so with the join button as well. Basically, the perks are the same across YouTube and Patreon, and so we put up fun bonus episodes. So I just put up all the bonus episodes for the month of September. So the bonus episode that everybody gets is kind of like a little bit of a Unite recap vlog, basically just kind of like walking everyone through kind of my perspective of attending the event and the sessions that I attended and kind of my thoughts on things along the way. And of course, sharing some pictures and videos of the experiences. So definitely go check that out. Also, we did a Q&A episode for the people at the L2 cash support tier and up. So we had a question actually from TJ Game Dev, fellow YouTube creator.
Yeah, and on Twitter I've seen.
Yeah. He's been doing a bunch of stuff on Twitter lately, specifically dot stuff. He's been doing this cool
exactly.
like little battle thing.
Yeah, a little RTS style game where you have characters that shoot other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a cool looking thing. It looks good. He's using kind of the Cinti assets with some good animations on them and everything. So it looks really good so far. So yeah, he asked a question that I think we're going to talk about a little bit later on in today's video, but he was asking about specifically using system API.exists and if it's an expensive method, because it sounds like he's kind of using it a lot through part of his code. So Danny, I actually have a couple of related things that I'd like to ask you about on that. But it ended up actually being a really good discussion. Discussion with myself, I guess. Just kind of like talking about this method. I kind of went into some of the source code to, see if it
I
actually
definitely
is
think we should look at
expensive.
it. Look at the source code for this one.
Yeah. It's a fun one. And then, brought up some other topics about just kind of, how he's using it and some potential other architectural considerations that he might want to use in his project. So, go ahead and check that out. And then finally, for the behind the scenes episode for this previous month, that's available to the people at the L1 cash support tier and up. As some of you may know, something that I've kind of been hinting at for a little while is I've been working on a Vampire Survivors clone. So I just kind of did a little bit of an update video to kind of, share my progress on how everything with that has been going so far. So again, check us out. It's over on Patreon and YouTube memberships. And we really do appreciate your support over there. Okay, so let's get into some of the actual ECS topics here. So the first one that I wanted to do is just our cache hit, the Unity Dots quick tip of the week here. This will be a very quick one. It was something that's just kind of on the top of my mind because did actually talk about this actually in the Q&A, and it's something that I've been kind of using recently. And I don't think that we've talked about this really on the cache hit portion. That is creating custom system groups. So
it's actually one of the few what's it called, special things I talked about during the Dutch talk, I feel like.
Yeah, that's right.
It's one of the few where I was like, I feel like we need better ways of talking about how does update actually work and how to think of it differently than the one. And the best way to do it is by talking about system groups and also just like mentioning that you can make your own.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'm sure most of the viewers of this channel already know, but system groups, there's 3 of them by default. So there's kind of like an initialization system group. There's the simulation system group, which is where most of your code exists by default and where kind of like most of your game logic should be happening. And then finally, there is a presentation system group, which actually kind of does the rendering and stuff like that. And so you can, of course, create your own custom system groups, which can basically be like, subgroups of these system groups. And really the main purpose of this is kind of for organization, but there's still some cool stuff that you can do with them. So for example, I have this interaction system group here. Now, the way that I kind of have this little Vampire Survivors project set up is I have kind of these, different interaction systems that kind of, basically detect interactions between 2 different entities. And so and these are all, in their own separate systems, their own separate things, but they're still kind of like basically all just detecting these interactions. And I want these to happen before kind of like my attack system group, which is actually like, executing attacks, because some of these things that happen inside the interaction system group, need to be raised essentially before things in my combat system, all my attack systems here. So basically what I have done is I've set up this these custom system group called the interaction system group. And you see that all you do to define this is just do a public partial class, call it whatever you'd like, and then you inherit from component system group. And then on here, you can just kind of add, all the regular attributes that you might to any other regular system. So for example, I have it updating in the simulation system group because I, of course, want it to run, with all my main player logic. And actually, I guess I misspoke, and the interaction system updates after the attack system group. Just want to make sure it happens after the fixed step simulation group as well. Because I think it must be the other way around, where things in the attack system group can potentially raise interactions. So that's just kind of how I want it to happen. Now, the nice thing about this is if I have any interaction systems, for example, this handle entity interaction, all I can do is just say update in group, type of interaction system group. And then I know that, it's going to be inside that interaction system group, and it's going to update after, everything in my attack system. And it's just going to be in the appropriate place in the frame. And I don't have to like do a whole bunch of, update befores and afters on every system that are, kind of part of that interaction system. So it's really helpful for, ordering things. And then also because this, inherits from component system group, one of the interesting things that you can do is you can kind of say disable in a particular system group if you wanted to. So for example, if you wanted to like, pause some kind of like broad feature set of your game, you can just kind of like disable that full system group if you'd like, and then those systems just, won't run. So Danny, do you have any kind of other things that you want to say on system groups, how you use them, how often do you use these, and what do you like about them?
I mean, I tend to be careful about overusing them because they can end up in the same problem as inheritance, which is like pre-grouping, and therefore also now all the dependencies you get from just like, oh, if I change this one place, then I have to change all the places using it. There is obviously the good thing here with system groups, which is that generally they don't have that much behavior to it. But it is also something to note that you can actually like component system group, because it's a class, and it's actually, if you look at the implementation of component system group, try going there now. It's just a system base. It's just a normal system base. So you can actually override the on update, and then you can, instead of having it update systems, you can say, hey, only update these systems under this specific criteria. For instance,
right.
You could have in your subscene a specific component, and then as soon as that component is present, only then should it start ticking the system. So if you actually find the on update function in here.
Yeah, I'm looking.
I mean, you can also search.
Yeah, who wants to do that?
get to see all the nitty gritty.
Well, yeah, my thing is
The
weird
on update
because
is a lot simpler.
well, yeah, I was just gonna say my thing is a little bit weird because my Control F right now doesn't map to find. So
But it was there. Yeah. So a little up.
here we go.
Yeah, on update. So as you can see, if you override on update, you can yourself just choose to call update all systems, but only under specific criteria. Like you could, for instance, have a system API run, checking a bunch of stuff, and then coming up with some final results, and then only then should you call update all systems, and it will update all the systems inside of that group, in that under that condition.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, even if you wanted, you could do like inside of an on create, have like a require for update, right? And then that
Yes.
would only, update the systems within that group if that entity exists. So yeah, there's some cool things you can do with it, but I kind of get what you're saying about, be cautious about overusing them.
Also, because it's just more code. If you don't need it, don't like pre-group things.
Yeah,
Like start grouping once you have things to group, right? So-
Right. Yeah. That's kind of like the approach that I took with my project is like, as I was starting out and I only had like a few interactions and a few attacks, it's easy enough to kind of like manage those. But then it's like, my project starts getting to the point where it's like, okay, I have a lot of these interactions, I have a lot of these attacks, and I want, these all to happen in this section and these all to happen in this section. So in that case, it makes sense for me to, create system groups for those two separate things.
Yes.
So yeah, system groups, use them if you want. Okay, next up we can go over to our context switch here and go ahead and do this, and we're going to be talking about a new entities version today.
I didn't know we released a new version.
You guys have just been on it, just putting these out all left and right and everything. So
Yeah. What's
yes.
in this one?
What was that?
What is in this one?
Something really cool here, actually. So yeah, this is version 1.3.2. So new feature added. So overloads for component lookup has component, try get component, has buffer, try get buffer, which adds a parameter for out bool entity exists, as well as component lookup entity exist and buffer lookup entity exist APIs. So yeah, this says to allow user code to distinguish entity non-existence from component non-existence without additional boilerplate.
Oh yeah, no, we had this discussion internally.
Yeah. So I thought this was kind of a nice thing to have because yeah, there are some times when, you call one of these methods, component lookup has component, and then it fails, and then you don't know if it failed because, that component doesn't exist or that entity doesn't exist. So this, basically returns or gives the out bool entity exists. So now you can kind of, again, do your own logic in there quite easily to determine if it is the entity doesn't exist or if that entity doesn't have that component. So there's a little differentiator on there. Is there anything else that you want to say about any of those kind of discussions and reasons that this might be useful to people?
No, I think you already covered it, which is that it's useful to know the distinction.
Yeah. No, I mean, it seems pretty straightforward. As far as other things that were changed in here, it seems like there were a lot of kind of API documentation. So this is like, discouraging use of exclusive entity transaction entity manager property. Added API docs discouraging creation of entity query objects with multiple descriptions. So I didn't even know that you could do this. So if you create like multiple entity query descriptions, you could kind of use multiple of those to create one entity query?
Yeah, exactly. So entity query descriptions are used in the old API of how you get an entity query. Like right now, we recommend people use entity query builder instead to craft a entity query. But back in the day, you used get entity query, passed in an entity query description, and that entity query description had the ability to include multiple. Like you could have, I don't know if it was multiple entity query descriptions or, I guess it is, yeah, multiple query descriptions. But anyways, you could have multiple queries described within the query, and it means that if any one of them matches, it's a match.
Interesting.
So for any given entity, it will look at that query, and then it will try to match it with one of them. And if it doesn't match that one, it will try and match it with the other one. And if it matches any one of those two, then it's still a positive match. But it's
that seems a little confusing. So
it's very confusing and it's very niche, and the chance that you need it is basically nil. Like, chance is low.
Right. Yeah. I can't really think of too many use cases where I would want that specific thing set up in that way.
Yeah. And it is there's a lot of complicated code to supporting that, which is why it's completely it's a mess that we have it. We shouldn't have it for such a niche, and
right.
and even that niche is like there's other ways of doing it.
Yeah, makes sense. And yeah, here's another weird thing that they had also changed, and this is something that I had never encountered because there's literally been no reason for me to do either of these things. But zero size iBuffer element data and zero size iShared component data structs no longer cause the type manager to throw during initialization. So I don't know why you would want to have a dynamic buffer where the elements are essentially tags. And shared component.
You can see in the wording of this message, by the way, that someone was like, "Why the fuck did I even try this?"
Yeah, it says zero size buffer and shared components are usually a sign of pointless waste.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially buffer components, which have significant chunk memory cost, even if the actual elements are empty, but they shouldn't cause a fatal error.
It's like, I disagree with what you did here, but it shouldn't cause an error, so I'm going to fix it.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I could
shared component I can more understand than buffer element.
Yeah, I was going to say shared components I could kind of understand, but at the same time, there's no real difference than just using a tag component because it doesn't add to the entity.
Yeah,
so
the reason you use a shared component is that when you change the shared component, you also change all the entities that have the same values into the same groupings.
Right.
That obviously matters what kind of values are inside the shared component for that to change around. If there's no data on your shared component, there's nothing to move it to. No, it makes no sense. A buffer and buffer elements, I don't know.
Yeah, why you'd want an array of all the same tag.
Yes.
So
yeah. What? Maybe it's because no, I can't see it. I really cannot see it. It must be some refactoring period where you might have it.
Or you could count the number of tags for some.
No. Use a number. Use a component with a number.
Yeah, use a component with a single integer.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like it must be because you have a bigger project, and in that bigger project, you've been refactoring away until a component that you have in a lot of places no longer has any data on it. And as a result, now that there's no longer any data on it, you don't want to go around fixing all the authoring code that is adding that component. And so you just let the component be there.
Or if there are any queries or something like that you want to match.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's
yeah,
fair.
So it's more. It seems
you should
like
avoid getting to that point,
problem.
But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like a bigger project where all of a sudden certain components make no longer any sense, but you don't want to spend the time actually removing
going
those components.
Through and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's no chance that you're making it on purpose.
No.
Really fucking no chance. I mean.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, so looks like they fixed a couple SGICE002 and SGICE003 errors.
Oh yeah, I fixed
So
that. That's yeah.
what are those?
What was it? Trying to
Does
recall
it
here.
happen if you type in invalid C# code?
Oh no. That's exactly what. I got a bunch of tickets in where people were typing invalid C# code, like code that just shouldn't compile in the first place. And if you look in the console, it was showing their error, the one that was the problem that they should have just fixed. Um, and at the same time, there was also an SGIs because our source generator was like, "What the hell did you just type out? You typed out something sort of system API related, but this is not the right syntax. Like you haven't completed the statement yet." So I just went in and fixed a bunch of different cases where people have written tickets specifically saying, "Hey, I'm getting an SGIs for writing invalid code," and then I made sure that there's no SGIs in those cases. But holy I was so close to not doing that because it makes no sense. Like you're writing errors. Of course, things won't
Of
do the
course, it's
right
not
thing.
going to work.
And I get that. Like obviously, you don't want too many errors being thrown in the console because then that will hinder your debugging experience, figuring out what's actually the problem. Um, but in this case, it just felt so completely stupid looking at it. And it was like 3 different projects as well, 3 different tickets.
Well, so actually, this kind of is a little bit of a side tangent here, but so like when people, I guess, submit bugs, then how does that end up getting assigned to you? Does it kind of like go through some process and then people be like, oh, like this is something that Danny worked on, and then you kind of get assigned that ticket?
So we have something called KTLO, which stands for keeping the light on.
Okay.
And every week we switch who gets to look into bugs and issues. And generally speaking, we just pick whatever seems the most important at the time. However, there are obviously certain subject matters that some of us know more of than others.
Right.
So the one who's on KTLO duty, if they look at a ticket and sees, oh, this is source generator related, then it's pretty much always me that ends up with it. If it's component lookup related, then it's usually Court or me. So it's like we have specific people where we know they are more the expert and could likely fix it in a quicker amount of time than anyone else on the team.
Gotcha. And then so is that basically just within the entities team, like that you have that keeping the lights on kind of rotation between the different people, and you guys get all the entities tickets? Is that generally
pretty much
works,
every team at Unity has some version of KTLO, because they're currently working on a feature set or feature or something new, or like a massive refactor of some kind, like the bigger main project that someone is working on. And at the same time that happens, you also want to make sure that the stuff that you worked on in the past still works, and so that's keeping the lights on. For some teams, they have specific individuals where that is the only responsibility that they have is to keep the lights on. Those teams call it keep for whatever reason, but our team has KTLO instead, KTLO duty, and then we just each week switch who is on that duty.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was curious because actually just last night I started listening to this podcast here. It's the Game Engineering Podcast, and they had Casey Muratori on as a guest. And he was actually talking a lot about his time at Rad Game Tools. It was super interesting how they were structured. Basically, they had, for like every product that they shipped, they just had like one solo developer who was like the person who, created and maintained that project. So Casey, he was kind of the owner of this animation library, essentially called Granny, and
That's a good name.
yeah, so he created the tool. He actually talked a little bit about his history of like he's shipped version 1.0 of it. All using C++, object-oriented programming, and apparently it was just terrible. It was awful. And then he said it was really cool because at Rad Game Tools, he kind of had the freedom to basically kind of scrap the whole thing, make a 2.0 version using just straight procedural C code, which ended up being way better in so many reasons, and ended up being a more successful product because of that. But anyways, he was also saying that all the support tickets for Granny would just go straight to his inbox. So he said it was kind of like a little bit of a motivating factor to make the product as best as it could be. If he's continually getting all these support tickets and requests for features, that he's going to want to add those features in, so he doesn't have to answer all these support tickets basically. Yes. So it was kind of like an interesting approach they took. Of course, not every company can do that exact same
and the volume at which Unity gets in bug tickets, it's
that
I'm
sure.
Scale we certainly couldn't do.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's also a whole process in itself on just like how do we, like, when a person reports an issue, how does that progress into the actual, like, me getting the ticket?
Right.
Like, as soon as someone fills out a request, like an issue, then it initially goes through QA, which will make sure that, it's reproducible.
Yeah,
that someone can actually reproduce the problem. Mm-hmm. And in that case, it then gets, sent further into, for the most part, almost directly into our inbox. Not inbox, but the Jira system that we have. And then at that point, QA will also have like made a rating of like, this is the amount of user pain it causes. And that rating system is so funny because it's so superficial. Like, there's a number, you rate the user pain points.
Okay.
And it's like, this ticket has 18 points. This ticket has 10 points. Oh, so I should work on the 18 one. Not necessarily. Like, you will sometimes see some user pain bug that is like 10 for a crash or 18 for like a minor nuisance. And you're like, well, this is clearly opposite. Like, it's more important to fix that crash. A crash should never happen, ideally.
Right, yeah.
But that
so it's kind of subjective of like how those points get assigned, basically.
Yeah.
Just whoever's keeping the lights on that week, however they're feeling.
No, it's not the keeping the lights on people. It's QA because it's QA's responsibility, generally speaking, to make sure that those points are somewhat valid.
I see.
And they also have some gauge at which to try and give their subjective opinion correctly based on. But it's still, it doesn't really cover everything, and so you can basically not trust those points at all. So you really gotta look out for the title instead. Like, crash is bad. Don't.
Right. Yeah.
And then there's also some priority based on if it's like an ISS customer, which is someone that pays to get additional support.
Okay. Yeah.
But for the most part, it's just like we look at our backlog of errors and then see if some are low hanging fruit, if some are like not so low hanging but easy for fix for someone that have some amount of knowledge on the given area, and then we punt it around, or we just like solve it ourselves. And sometimes sometimes there's not a source gen bug, and then I will go investigate something in our serialization logic for a week. And that's oftentimes also still gives us a new thing to add to the changelog.
Yeah, well, and that's cool because you get exposure to different parts of the API that you didn't necessarily create, yes, but you still kind of like have a full picture of things.
And it's extremely important for that, I feel like, because if I wasn't looking at bug tickets from other areas that are not my expertise, then I wouldn't know about those areas, and so I wouldn't be able to confidently go around our code base.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
to me,
definitely.
that's like the biggest part of my job is going around the code base in places that I've never been in before. This is especially the case on the most recent thing I'm working on, which was re-announced at Unite this year.
Entities
For
for all.
exactly entities for all, game objects being half entity. And making that change is certainly a lot of going around game object code and looking at their use case, figuring out like the different dependencies that are there. And that's just a lot of code that I've never seen before, and all the internals of that, and figuring out on the spot how does this code work without ever having seen it before, and without having any documentation. And for the most part, the code being written in like 2007, and the person who worked on it is not even here anymore. We used to have him; he's not here. We used there's so many people who left in the parts of code that I'm looking at. So there is no documentation, and there's no person who's even able to describe it fully. So it's such an important skill to be able to
Legacy
go
code,
out.
baby.
So yeah, exactly. No, I mean any code really. Like most code you find will not be documented, especially in the lower end. Like the lower you go, the more niche it gets. Until you're at the new, level of the CPU, at which point everything is very documented. Because
You're looking
generally
at
speaking,
instructions, yeah.
yeah, the instruction I will document it. They sort of have to be.
Yeah, yeah. You'd hope.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a fun little tangent there. And then, yeah, the last thing in the ECS changelog here is no reference exception on Unity object ref after asset garbage collection. And it should note that this fix does require editor versions 2022.3.43 if you're on 2022. However, if you are on Unity 6000, you need to upgrade to 6000.0.16. So, yeah.
I think most people still just call it 6. You don't have to say 6,000.
I'd still call it 6000 because that is the actual version number.
It's so painful.
Then why'd you name it that?
Well,
You
because-
specifically, Danny. Why did you
yeah,
choose
yeah.
that
Why
name?
I named it that? I mean, a part of me really wished that we would have gone for the like we're gonna refactor our project versions to make it work, because that is an option technically speaking, at least in our internal code releases. Obviously, it might break some user projects for doing that, and I think that's the reason that they haven't done it. Because the problem is, the reason that it's 6,000 is that when you have a package, you can specify, hey, only enable this define
Right.
if you have this version.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If you look in some asset store projects, you see like a million of these scripting defines, if Unity 2022, if Unity 6000, if Unity 5.4.
Yeah, exactly. And for the most part, what's it called? If you do it for your package, it's you don't use the specific version defines that we have.
Yeah.
Because we have like Unity 6000 or something as a version define, but that's not usually what you should do. Instead,
Right.
you
You
should
say
be doing adding
if-
to your config if Unity is above this version.
Right.
Then
if
enable
newer
this
than,
feature.
or yeah.
Yeah, and then it should be in a define mentioning what it enables, not just the version, but what it enables. Like, oh, this version enables path tracing or the new renderer or something. Like, it's like you need for it to not be you develop for a certain version. You need for it to be you develop a feature for a certain version.
Yeah. So, yeah, Unity 6000, no reference exception.
Yeah.
Do you know what this is all about? No reference exception after asset garbage collection?
I mean, chances are it's somewhere where we didn't track the memory, because Unity object ref points to an actual object that has been allocated in your project. It has to, because instance IDs are only associated with assets that are in your project already loaded. And so when you do, there's like a unload all unused assets call that you can use. if you were to use that one, then and we haven't logged it, making sure that something is actually pointing to it, or like a GC handle or something like that, then it will just be cleaned up, and so all of a sudden you will have null pointers for your Unity object refs just because it some other method cleaned it up. So I think it's related to unload all unused assets. I know someone has been looking at unload all unused assets quite a lot.
Okay.
So I think it's probably that one.
All right. Good to know. And then, I also wanted to point out real quick, the other package that did get some major updates here is netcode for entities, actually. So one thing that they did add is a significantly reduced bandwidth consumption of command packets. So if you have like input packets, things like this, they kind of go into how they accomplish that. There's a bunch of new things added, just kind of pretty like low-level optimization, seems like, for the most part. Stuff having to do with like lag compensation, other debugging stuff. So some good things in there. If you're interested, feel free to go read through it. Do also want to point out that one of the changed things is physics world history now clones collision world after the build physics world for a given server tick. So it seems like there were some potential issues here that this is fixing, and I think I maybe even had experienced just some weird off by one things with the physics world and netcode and stuff like that. So we'd be curious to know if that kind of helps out with things. They do say that they recommend testing for lag compensation, as this may introduce some regressions. So this should be kind of considered a minor breaking change here. So just want to point that out if you are using netcode for entities and considering updating your version here. Really good that they also say they did some documentation improvements and some clarification for things on command stream, ghost snapshots, spawning ghosts, logging, network connection, networked queue prediction, and RPCs. So yeah, definitely, there were a couple things, especially when I was learning this for my netcode for entities tutorial, that seemed to be kind of missing from the documentation relating to some of these things. So I haven't gone through and read through the new updated pages, but, glad to know that they are updating some things there. And then just other things related to, lag compensation, some server tick stuff, some iOS and WebGL things, and so a lot of good updates in here, it seems like. And then finally, last thing that I did want to point out, character controller. Looks like it finally got a official version here, not a pre-release or experimental version.
Wow, it's released.
So yeah, big shout out to Philip. So yeah, it's not on the 1.3. So I don't know if character controller, if that is that you kind of using its own kind of version scheme, like separate from entities. Do you know?
Maybe, probably. I mean, 1.2.4 makes it sound like that's the case, because obviously that doesn't track with everything elsewhere.
Because entities 1.2 is 1.2.4. But that just might be a coincidence.
But it is recent, that release, right? So the
entities is from August, and then the character controller is September 17th.
But it still feels, because isn't 1.3 still in sort of pre-release phase?
So actually it's not.
Is 1.3? Oh yeah, it is.
Yeah, so that was the one that we were just looking at, is the 1.3.
Yeah, no, yeah, right. Then I honestly don't know what's going on. I should ask.
So actually, yeah, this is the first non-pre-release version of 1.3, it appears. And then
it's very confusing. I mean, it probably doesn't matter that much, because
it was just one. I was just curious. Yeah.
I think chances are you can probably use it with either version, and it's
Right,
fine.
right. But yeah, either way, shout out to Philip finally getting this as a official release, non-pre-release, non-experimental in here. So exciting stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, we can kind of move on into our instruction set here, which is talking to Danny about ECS. We'll call it that, sure. So I think a good place to start might just be kind of what we were referring to a little bit earlier about the system API.exists and kind of going into some of the source code on that. So I will go ahead and share this screen. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and go in here and say system.
Well, that won't help you. You need to, for instance, use component lookup, because system API under the hood uses component lookup.
Well, so I was going to show real
entity
quick. I was
storage
going to show something real quick.
Okay.
So system API.exists, and then we just do like entity.null here. So what we can do is in writer, of course, we can check the generated source code by clicking the dots and show generated code. And then we can come here and then we see, so this ends up getting generated. This does entity exist.
Yeah.
Is this a fine place to go ahead and look about this, or?
Sure. I mean, so the way that our source generator works is that it will, it can't really, like normally you would need multiple calls generated in here, like a complete and then an exists. I think exist might be the case where we might not need to, but anyways, we have methods that actually call the entity storage lookup. Like all the lookups that we generate for system API calls, we have to invoke a method, not directly on the lookup, but as part of internal compiler interface, and that's why you see it this way. It's actually just still an entity storage info lookup, so we can still look at it if you want. I could try going into it.
Okay. Well, I mean, do you want me to look at the component lookup version instead? Is that better to?
No. I mean, it's still correct. It still ends up being the same call.
Going to the same thing.
So you can see here that we are doing a .update on the entity storage info lookup that we generated.
So now I was actually looking into this update yesterday, and so this looks like this only does stuff if this enable Unity collision checks is active.
Correct.
So otherwise it doesn't do anything? Correct. Okay. And then when is this active? Do you have to manually add that?
No. So you know how there's like what's it called? The jobs panel in the.
Is it this thing here where you got a burst and then
safety checks on? If you have right now, that define is enabled.
Okay.
So if it was off, then you wouldn't have it enabled.
And it's off essentially in builds, right?
Yeah. So, but in editor for the most part, most people have safety checks on, and so as a result,
so we get good error messages and know when things are failing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is what gives you the proper safety handles and errors in case you were scheduling the job while another job is also writing to entities or something.
Right? Gotcha.
Yeah, so that's the update call. An update call for component lookup and buffer lookup does do something more than just that. It specifically updates the the version number.
Okay.
Then you can look at exists. Yeah, which and just checks the entity component store. So every entity storage info actually just stores the entity data access. The entity data access you can think of as like a combined entity manager, like a low-level version of the entity manager and entity command buffer. pretty much all entity command buffer and entity manager both are just a wrapper around entity data access. And entity storage info also just uses that directly for its exists. And from that, it can get the entity component store, and the entity component store is a set of functionality for one given world where all the entities are stored. And then you can go into that and check the exists. Yes. Here you go. Validate entity checks that the entity is in the what's it called? Has the correct sort of indexing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's just kind of. I think it's just checking to make sure the index is like within appropriate values.
Yeah. For instance, if the index is negative, it usually means that you're trying to.
Right.
You're checking exists
temporary entity from an entity command buffer.
Exactly. And if it is above the maximum allowed, then something definitely went wrong. Because we only allow allocating a certain amount of entities. But most people realistically don't reach that limit. You can actually try going in and seeing what the maximum amount of entities you can make are.
Is it this here?
No, but maximum theoretical amount of entities. Yeah.
Entities in block, which is...
You can just mouse over, then it calculates.
Oh. 134217728. So that's going to be, what, put a comma there. 134 million?
Yeah, 134 million, it seems like.
It's up there. That's up there.
So, yeah, realistically, you shouldn't end up in that amount, especially since, that's the amount of active entities. Because we reuse indices, you're realistically never going to reach that limit. Unless you really...
But
you're
I
not
want
gonna
4
stimulate.
billion.
Yes, look, there's already a problem there. So, yeah, no, we don't allow for that huge of an amount. If you go back... Yeah, and then back again. There you go. So now that we know it's a valid entity, and validate entity does asserts, so it will actually throw if you're trying to call this existent function.
Right, that's kind of what I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas the rest of it is made to ideally not assert. So, for instance, if you look at the first if statement, it will do exists, which I guess I can just go through this call. We first check if the entity... No, we don't have to go into it yet. So when you call exists here, what we're doing is we're quickly checking the indice number with the validate entity. Then we are checking here in this line that it's a valid entity. So it exists in what we call the entity store. The entity store being where we store all the entity indices, right? Our free list of entities. And then we check below that if we can find a chunk for it. And then we get the archetype, and then we from the chunk. And then from the from the archetype, we can get the entity component store. And now that we have the entity component store, we need to validate that the world that we got for... Because now we have the chunk, and a chunk has to be associated with an archetype, and an archetype has to be associated with a world. And as a result, we need to make sure that the world that we're doing this with matches the world of the entity storage. What's it called? The entity storage info lookup that we used, right? So the entity storage info lookup, you allocated already with a world matched to it. So therefore, you need to make sure that these two match now at the end, so that it's allowed to do the rest of the operation you normally would be doing. In this case, it's technically it technically wouldn't need to check the world because you're not going to use it for anything specific. In the future, this function might also change, but yeah, it's currently made so that it will check if that entity exists in this specific world, and so that's why it checks that last statement. So all of these are fairly cheap operations. Let's take one of the cheap examples, which is like get chunk. Yeah, which just calls get entity in chunk. Yeah.
Yeah, I was seeing this is just kind of some basic math and bit manipulation operations, which I assume Burst would just kind of chew right through.
Yeah, this is meant to be a very fast lookup. So what it's doing is it's figuring out the right block to use based on the index. And then from the index, it's just like where inside this block should it index into. And then it checks if that it has data associated with it. And if it does, then of course it's a valid entity, and so you get back chunk. So that's like all that a lookup in entities is it's specific. If you notice here, it doesn't even look at the version number; it just looks at the indice because it's an index lookup. You should think of it as like looking up an element in an array. This whole function is basically just looking up an array element in an array.
Right. Yeah.
Which you can see at line 13. Well, 13 from the line you're
13,
currently
at. Yes.
Yes. That is just a lookup inside that buffer. Now, if we go back again, you can see a similar thing for archetypes. Actually, archetypes is even simpler than that. So looking up the archetype is you have a chunk index, and the chunk data is just an array of chunk archetypes.
Right.
No, chunk data. Yeah, it's an array of chunk data, and the chunk data stores the archetype and a pointer to the buffer, which contains the actual data inside the entity. But yeah, this is a quick way of getting the archetype, which is just another lookup. So you're doing one lookup here, you're doing another lookup for getting the chunk, and let's see what exist is for going a little up.
This here, you mean?
Yeah.
And this looks like pretty much the same stuff as
it's essentially 3 lookups, and it's basically it is actually the same. It's the exact, like you can see that it's the same because it's like the one UL blah 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 little mask that we have there is the same mask that you saw on the other one. The only difference is here we are returning false or true, whereas in the other function we were returning the actual indice. The actual chunk index. The check is the same. It's kind of, in a way, it's kind of stupid that we're doing it twice.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is there any way that could be like kind of streamlined to all be just you just do this once?
Probably.
Yeah.
So the reason that it probably hasn't happened yet is, if you will notice, if you go back one step, there is an hashtag if there, which is this is actually fairly recently changed. In version 1.0, it looked like the bottom one, and in 1.1 or 1.2, I can't remember when we changed the entity store.
Yeah.
To entity store v2, then it's no longer the bottom case, because in the bottom case you actually do need the world in order to check the entity, because every chunk and entity was stored inside a given world, so we didn't have global entities that span across multiple worlds. Now we when you allocate an entity, we allocate it like concurrently and atomically, in a way where it's still multi-threadable, but it's what's it called? Like multi-world supported. So you uniquely know from an entity index which chunk it's associated with.
Right. Yeah. And because I was looking into this, and it seems like this is actually just super easy stuff. It's just keying into these arrays here, and says does the version match whatever you're passing in for the index for whichever version of the entity, and then it also is checking some things on the chunk as well. So this seemed very quick and efficient. So I wasn't sure if, I mean, all this stuff seems very fast as well, but this almost just seems like even quicker. So I don't know if there was like,
In the end, we measured it, and it doesn't have a big performance impact.
okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was curious if there was any perceptible difference between the two, and I wasn't sure.
Not really, no. I mean, if you, it's obviously still a lookup. You're still doing a lookup, which still has a cache missed cost.
Right.
But I don't think you should, for the most part, worry about it too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless you obviously are seeing something in your profile or telling you otherwise. In that
Yeah,
case,
this is, yeah. Because yeah, that was one of the things kind of going back to the Q&A that TJ was asking about, like, is this an expensive operation? Because it sounds like he's using these system API.exist calls in several places throughout his code base to kind of, validate that entities do exist before doing other operations on them. So he wasn't sure. And I was just curious, like, if he changed over to the entity store V1, if he saw any, performance difference at all. But I would assume that would be probably pretty negligible.
Yeah, it definitely is. And with the new one, it opens up so many new opportunities that are way outweigh the benefits, the costs.
Yeah, so that was kind of one of the other things that I wanted to ask you about is kind of, what are kind of the reasonings for moving over to this like global entity indexing, and what are some of the benefits and things that it kind of unlocks?
I mean, say you were making a new version of Unity, one where game objects need to allocate an entity as well.
Right, right. Very theoretical.
Very theoretical here, right? In that world, you sort of want to allocate the game object without thinking too much about worlds, and in that case, it's definitely ideal that you just have one global entities number. Now, secondly, there's also the case of like, what sort of action does it take in order for you to easily move an entity from one world to another world? Well, beforehand, it meant quite a lot of restructuring. You would have to move over the version numbers and the entity numbers, and you had no way of referencing one entity from one world and another entity from another world. So working with multiple worlds was quite a mess. And it's still like there's still data islands, so you shouldn't really do too much between worlds. But in this case, you're still able to like actively think about what an entity is as like a global concept. Like an entity, when you have like, for instance, if you have your debugger, if you have a debugger and you attach it, you will actually get like a little debug view showing, oh, this entity has these chunks associated with it. But did you know that in the previous version, while it did allow you to do this, it would just pick the first entity. So say you were making a multiplayer game, and in the multiplayer game, the netcode multiplayer game you're making, you had one world, you had your client world and your server world, and you were trying to debug a certain entity. Well, in that case, that entity that you saw was actually just the first one that it found, which tends to be, I think, the server world. So you would normally just get the server worlds, and so even though you were like looking at what you thought was like the client world entity, it is just overlapping with the server world entity, and so in that case, it just ended up still giving you back the server world entity, and so the chunk data you saw on it was all wrong. It had all the wrong components. So like especially for like a netcode use case that do use multiple worlds, it's like a debugging nightmare if they're not global. There's also like some stuff that this unlocks, like the way that it currently works when you create an entity with the entity manager. It is obviously created right then and there. But what is it that happens if you were to use an entity command buffer? well, it creates a deferred entity, like an entity that isn't quite valid yet, that you can't add any chunks to, or you can't do anything with, right? And it's a negative version, so that means that you can't even store that entity. You're not allowed to store that entity in a component because that entity will be a different
Right.
entity at the time of instantiation.
Yeah.
And so ideally, you can just like create the right entity up front atomically when the entity command buffer does it. And that way you can already store the information right then and there. You don't need a separate job to actually set up everything after.
Could that potentially be used for like baking systems as well?
I mean, depends on your use case, but yeah, I mean, there's no reason you couldn't. But the thing to remember here is that these when we say they're global, it just means that they are what's it called? They're global for your editor session. You shouldn't think of them as like, oh, I can just like take a snapshot of all these entities and then like it will be the same number after. But one thing it also does enable us is to look at all the entities that were part of baking, serialize them to disk. Then now when we have serialized every entity to disk, we made sure to do it in order so that all the entity indexes are still there. And because they're global, we could store a separate file called like the debug info file or something that has all the entity names. And now all of a sudden you can get debug names into your builds in order to check all the names and like, oh, this didn't work as I expected. And so you would be able to debug builds of your game way easier because you have extra information about it.
That's nice.
Now, obviously,
yeah.
we haven't made this yet, but it
Right.
certainly unlocks more
That as a
opportunity for us to.
possibility, yeah.
Yeah.
So now to kind of step back, so basically does the way this work, if I were to say spawn an entity in world A and that gets assigned an index of 5, does that mean in world B that's also running on my machine, in that editor session, does that mean that entity index 5 is essentially kind of like blocked off in
Yes.
world
Yes.
B? So like, now if I spawn something in world B, it's going to spawn at like an index 6.
Yeah, correct.
And then
And if you look at the code, if you go into the entity component store entities .cs file, I think you can do Shift L, which lets you find a file, and then you should find the entity component store entities, which is like 5 down.
okay.
Yeah, and then you need to find create or allocate. I think it's called allocate entities in here.
Let's see if I can.
It's not a long file, and there's not a lot of functions, so you can also just try to scroll.
Just kind of scroll around here.
Yeah, it's down, I think.
Allocate entities.
Yeah, which calls allocate entities, which calls allocate. Yeah.
Which calls allocate entities.
Yes.
Nice. That's
Yes. I mean, one of them
awesome.
is a native array, another one is a pointer and a number. And this last one is the actual thing that we use most of the time. If you notice this one, the way that it works is that it will like the most important part is line number 6, which is like an interlocked add, which is an atomic operation. So that means that if multiple threads were to call allocate entities, it's still able to actually allocate it. It will just wait with adding the number. Like it does a classic style of atomic operation. So that means that every thread gets their own number correctly associated, and if they're all happening on the main thread, that works out still totally fine. And so you end up with indices that are completely discrete all the time. And yeah, so multiple worlds will still not be able to allocate the same entity number because they all go into this one, and this one is just a global entity store that has
Gotcha.
all entities. And so if you go up to the top, the way that the global entity store works is that like this is the thing that adds it, and what it adds is a
Hello.
you can see the struct type called entity store. The shared static. There's a shared static in line 14. For the actual 14. Not yeah, there you go. And then entity store. Just control click on the entity store, and that. Oh, okay. Oh yeah,
there?
the struct. Yeah, the data block. I just noticed the data block. So you can see in the data block that it stores an array of allocated, an array of entity in chunk, and an array of versions, and an array of name by entity index. And so the most important one is the entity in chunk. What entity in chunk actually stores is what's known as the entity in chunk.
As you could imagine.
As you could imagine. So if you scroll a little down, then you can see the place that's actually using it. Go down a little more. A little more. It's one of the top functions, but it's still a little more. Get entity by... No, not that one.
Set entity in chunk.
I mean, ideally we want the reverse of that, which is the get entity in chunk.
Yeah, here we go. Get entity
there you go.
in chunk.
Yeah. Which, based on that number, gets us... well, that number is a pointer, right? It's a pointer to the actual entity in chunk. And so if you look at the entity in chunk...
This here?
Yeah. So when you get an entity can point you directly to an entity in chunk, and an entity in chunk gives you a chunk index and an index in the chunk. And so you go from an entity directly to a chunk index, and the chunk index gives you a index into the arrays of chunks. And then from there you can get the archetype, or you can get the chunk buffer. And with the chunk buffer, that's the start of the actual, memory for the chunk. And with the, what's it called? Archetype, that's most of the operations you want to check against ends up being in the archetype. Ideally, we try to minimize the amount of going to an archetype as possible. Ideally, you work from an archetype and then get a chunk.
Right, but you still want the ability to go both ways if you need it.
Yeah. So an archetype stores an array of chunks, and a chunk stores an archetype.
Right. Yeah. So ideally, like you were saying, you want to find an archetype and say iterate across all the chunks, so you kind of have that array of chunks. You can do that all kind of linearly. But if you kind of are at maybe the entity level and you need to get up to that archetype, you still need a way to navigate back up through that chain.
Yes. Yeah, and that's how we do it. We just look at the archetype from
cool. Pretty straightforward. I like it. Now, one kind of question I have, specifically when it comes to netcode for entities. If I were to say spawn a player on the server world, it gets assigned index 5, and then of course on all the client worlds it's going to spawn that new player entity. They're not all necessarily going to be they're not going to have index 5, right? Because they're still kind of technically discrete entities at that point.
Yes, I mean every time you call instantiate or create entity, it's going to have to spawn a new one that doesn't already exist.
Yeah, so it's not even though it's kind of the same representation of a particular entity across all those different worlds, they're really separate entities.
Yeah, no, they're still discrete.
And they all have their own unique index across all the different worlds.
Exactly how game objects also work. Every time you allocate a new game object, it gets a new instance ID.
Makes sense. Any other thing that you want to discuss as far as global entity store and any of that stuff?
I can't think of any. I'm sure that if Fabrice or some of the other people on my
They'd
team,
have some other things to chime in.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
No,
But
no,
no,
I
I'm
think
not
it's
aware of
it's
any.
it's good to kind of know about, and yeah, it seems like it kind of mostly gives like you guys a lot of possibilities to do things, like give us better debugging tools and such, right?
Yes, yes, yeah. And in a way, a lot of it enables us to very easily implement a lot of performance benefits.
Makes
Uh,
sense.
yeah.
Okay, another thing that I wanted to ask you about here is, see if I can find this. This, yes, haha. What is this, and why am I just finding out about this after I finished making a 2D dots game?
That is. Oh, it might.
Local transform 2D.
It sounds a lot like what's it called? Uh, we what's it called? We in the entity component samples. There's a sample of how to make your own transform system,
Oh, yeah, okay.
and I think that's what this is. I didn't know that it was
Well, this
showing up.
actually, shows up in the API documentation, and it's listed under this miscellaneous.custom transform namespace.
Yeah, try going to the entity component samples, just like the GitHub.
Yeah. Da, da, da. Nope, wrong one. So I'm assuming under entity samples, assets,
Let's see example code maybe.
baking, component system, example, job, math. Actually, let's see if we can do custom transforms under Hello Cube.
Yes, local to world 2D system. So this is a custom transform system and how you can make your own. So there's the
Okay, transform 2D authoring. Okay, so this is it right here probably.
and you can see that it adds a local transform 2D.
Yeah, so I see transform usage flags dot manual override.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're
which is
adding this. So yeah, okay. I must have been a little bit confused because the way that like this API documentation, it like lists it as like a thing.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, I know. If you scroll up a little, let's look at the using statements. Let's see if it has the miscellaneous namespace.
On this here.
It doesn't
does
even
not.
have that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah, that's why I was confused because I was like trying to see if I could add this into my project, but I didn't know like what like assembly definition I might need because it wasn't popping up with the miscellaneous custom transforms or whatever.
Yeah, no, I think it's this one. Also, something I also want to note here is that it's mentioning transform usage flag manual override. Do you happen to know what that is?
You manually override the custom or the transform usage flags?
No. So during the talk I gave on dots, I mentioned 4 usage flags, but I actually hide away 2 of them.
Okay.
I can't remember the other one. I think it was just a very uncommon one. But manual override is interesting in the sense that instead of requiring like a normal when how do you explain this? When a game object has a bunch of mono behaviors on it, there's a good chance that for each one of those mono behaviors, if it's in the subscene, it has a baker. All these bakers all call get entity now. That means that there's a bunch of get entity calls, all with their own transform usage flag usage, right? So one of them might say that I just want the entity to have rendering components.
Right.
Another one says I want rendering components. A third one says I want dynamic. And
Right.
so dynamic then overrules rendering components in the sense that now it also gets the local transform, whereas the other ones would just have made it get local
Yep.
to world.
Yep.
And specifically, the dynamic one will also make sure that if it was in the hierarchy, that it gets the parent component. So in that way, multiple have like when you go through that list, they each override with certain priority.
Mm-hmm.
Now, manual override has basically top priority, and so if you have if just one of them was manual override, it means that now
Basically, listen to me. Whatever I'm adding in here should be the source of truth.
exactly. And so what you will notice is that directly after they do local transform 2D, local to world,
you have to add a local to world, and you have to add
the parent
a
component
parent,
themselves.
and yeah.
Exactly. And in that way, they're now saying, hey, I want full permission to add my own components to this game object entity, and then the rest of the code in that sample will then tell you how you can actually use that to make your own little.
Yeah,
2D.
no, yeah. So I wasn't sure if this was a built-in thing, but yeah, it looks like you have to have to manually define the component and then create your own system that takes the local transform 2D and converts that over onto the local to world so it can actually be rendered.
Yeah, and it uses the old antiquated feature, write groups.
That old antiquated feature there, eh?
Yeah. I'm still not a particular fan of the write group feature.
I know. You're saying that. It makes sense, I guess, for this use case, right?
No, I mean this is the exact use case it was made for.
Yeah.
This is exact like if it needs any sample, it's this one. But I still don't like it. Like there's another way that one could do this that didn't need that attribute.
What, through a query?
I mean, if
with none?
if the transform system that we had written had a component that it was looking for, specifically, it was just looking for none on that component, then all you would have to do is in that offer up there, add that component, and now all of a sudden you can have custom behavior, as long as that
Like some
component
like
is there.
ignore default local to world or something.
Exactly. You don't need a whole specific feature which requires so much maintenance on our side, but also just like it's needlessly complicated to understand and read in order to do a similar thing you can already do with queries.
Well, now, so would that system theoretically already be ignored, though, because this entity doesn't have a local transform component? Because wouldn't the local to world system require a local transform?
Yeah, you're right.
So this is actually not necessarily necessary, right?
I don't actually believe it necessarily is.
For this particular case, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Which
maybe
again,
there is some weird thing.
Prove
That...
my point.
It's useless.
Because even the sample that we have trying to showcase this doesn't even show fully the right use case. Because it requires that you already have the same specific set of components on it.
Right.
And then you're using it for another purpose than their original intended purpose.
Well, let's see if we can find the local to world system.
I wish I knew if Core Keeper, because one of the reasons that Riot Group is there is also for modding purposes, and Core Keeper supports modding. I wonder how many Riot Groups they have, if any, because I don't even think that they do have it. And they're quite a big Dutch game, all things considered. Do you know Core Keeper? Have you heard of it?
I've heard the name. Let me. I Wait, actually, I could probably.
'Cause it
here.
recently rose in popularity.
Core Keeper.
That's Core Keeper. Now go into like SteamDB or something where you can actually see the like curve. Yeah, there. And then specifically, we don't want the price chart. We want the charts, which is like on the left. Yes. There you go. You can see the recent jump in popularity.
Wait, yeah, it's been out for like a while.
Yes. But
Huh.
it's because they recently released a 1.0 version.
Okay.
Heard quite good things about the game, but it's written in dots.
Okay.
ECS specifically. So if you want to make a mod for the game, you actually have to write your own systems and components.
That's cool.
And bakers even. It's like a fully ECS game. I sort of want to try doing it.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be a fun little exercise.
Also, I'm noticing one thing. Technologies. Engine, Unity, SDK, Epic Online. That's fun.
And you could also do the opposite. You could have Engine Unreal and Unity gaming services.
Yeah. I know quite a few games that do that.
Yep.
It's pretty cool.
Interesting.
But also, this game is pretty fun.
What kind of game is it?
It's you know the game Terraria?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's basically a top-down view version of that.
Okay.
So it also kind of it's like a cave version of Stardew Valley, I guess, if you know that game as well.
Okay.
Lot of boss battles, a lot of fighting underground, cave mining, a lot of darkness in the game.
Mine, build, fight, craft, and farm.
Yep. Unravel the mystery of
the ancient core.
Yeah. It's pretty fun because like in the game you obviously go around mining, gathering like materials in order to upgrade your gear, in order to fight the different bosses, and then when you fight a boss, you actually win against it. More of your cave starts like changing, so you start seeing new bosses appear and new things emerge along that side.
Gotcha.
It's a fun concept, and also your the base your spawn point starts at like a what's it called, like a glowing obelisk of sorts.
Okay.
With other glowing things around it, but they are like not glowing. They are like you can see that there is a line at which they all connect, and it looks like something that you can turn on at some point in the game. And have it start glowing, but initially it doesn't, and so you immediately know from just that what you're supposed to go around doing.
It's good game design right there. It's like you kind of like intuitively just kind of know what you need to do already.
Yes, and you kind of want to know like what is like I spawned here, but I don't know what the things around me means. So now I need to go around exploring until I figure out the thing at the very start of the game, what that means. And what it can do at some point, right? So, no, I think this is a cool Dots ECS game.
Yeah, I'll look into this a little bit.
Also, one of few examples of a 2D game made with ECS.
Soon to be my Vampire Survivors clone is another one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, I know because we're pre-recording this, so we got to wrap this up within the next 10 minutes here. But
Yes.
yeah, I think those were some good, fun little ECS engine topics. Any closing words before we move on to our closing segments here?
Can't think of any,
All right, sounds good. Well, yeah, appreciate the insights into some of the inner workings of ECS. Always good to kind of have a little bit more knowledge about what's kind of going on under the hood to help us optimize our game code and everything like that. So yeah, we can kind of move into our dynamic allocation portion of the show, which is the fun things to share with the community. So Danny, why don't you go ahead and let us know about what you're sharing with us this
Oh, you
week.
did manage to find it.
I
Great.
did. I managed to spell Acton and not Mike Action.
Yes, and you found a specific one.
Yep.
This is like an old interview between. Well, it just has Mike Acton in the name, but some of you might recognize the other person who is like speaking to the crowd at the moment on the side. Maybe we can get him in angle at some point in the video.
Just fast forward a little bit, and of course the over the shoulder shot.
Yeah. So you won't even really know who it is, and I didn't. Like initially when I watched it the first time around, I didn't know who this guy was. This is when I just learned about data-oriented design. I think I had just watched the C++ Mike Action talk, the classic one everyone knows from 2013,
Yep.
C++ conference, at least in this audience. I think most people know. But no, this is like a interview with Mike Action where he goes into different projects he's worked on. I what's it called? In another Hot Path Show episode, I mentioned a video I did where it was like a bunch of small segments of different ways to stop thinking about abstract-oriented thinking, thinking abstract first. And one of the snippets actually comes from this video, where he like talks about like if you are working on something and the implementation you did is kind of weird, kind of odd, but it works, then that's the right thing to do. Like anything else that you do is you don't need to. If it solves the problem that you have, it's not like you actually need to do the proper thing. And so he like also refers to I can't remember the name of the game. Bob was not alone or something. I can't remember the name of that game, but in that game there was apparently a talk on like how the physics of the game were made and how the physics is not really real world physics. It's just something that he's the guy put together, like jang together, but it solved the problem that he had. And so obviously that's still the right solution. Like
Yeah.
it can be fun without like it's. So yeah, it's about like not when programming, trying to steer away from what you might be taught in like universities, where you will learn all these like different abstraction approaches, like the service locator pattern, the observer, what's it called, the observer something pattern, all the different patterns.
Observer pattern, yeah.
Is it just called this? Yeah, it's of course. Like, there's videos on the subject saying like, oh, these are 50 different patterns you can use, and it's like, that's fine and all. What you should really do is you should look at like the ideas behind them and why certain people think that those are good ideas, and then you can make when you start implementing code, you should just like do it to solve the case that you're doing it. You shouldn't try to like match into some sort of pattern that already exists, because then you're gonna force yourself into that pattern instead of what actually fits your project, the thing that you're working on. So anyways, this video really has like a bunch of fun discussions around the subject, and obviously it's with Casey Moratori, which is the other guy here
who came up earlier on this episode.
Yeah, and it's even on I just noticed at the Handmade Con here is even on Molly Rocket, which is Casey's channel.
Yep.
So no, it's a fun discussion.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good one. I listened to this one a couple of years ago now, so yeah, probably due for a re-listen, because I remember.
Yeah, no, I can't even remember all the bits here. I can just remember that particular bit that I wanted to put it back in here because I think it's always fun to see. It's also interesting. Like I obviously did work at some point with Mike Acton, but it feels that Mike Acton that I worked with feels very different from this Mike Acton, which is the one that everyone knows. Which is sort of a bummer, but at the same time, I mean, I still think this is a good source of inspiration.
Yeah, totally. I remember there being just like good info in there as well as like related to just like getting into the games industry, things like that.
Yes, yeah, that was definitely also part of it.
Yeah. And yeah, actually, what you were saying kind of reminds me of a couple things that I was listening into this interview with Casey last night about, where he was kind of saying, when you start learning programming, you kind of learn things in a very procedural way, because you're just kind of like stringing together for loops and if statements and things like that, and you're just doing everything inside int main, right? And then as things start to kind of like grow in complexity, we kind of as humans start wanting to go like, okay, is there some kind of way that I can organize this code and to be like in a better structured way? And of course, a lot of universities and traditional enterprise environments, they kind of have this whole object-oriented programming methodology, and that again kind of makes sense from an organizational standpoint, at least initially, to kind of organize things, to have like some sort of structure. And just because it's the thing that's kind of widely taught, it's something that it kind of ends up being very widely adopted. But then he was saying, once he kind of started breaking that model for himself, he actually found it a lot easier to kind of return to a more procedural way of kind of reasoning about things. But then also, because he had that knowledge of object-oriented programming, he kind of had some ways of kind of like some strategies of organizing things, even though he wasn't creating his whole project in an object-oriented context, he was still kind of able to use kind of some of those organizational things to, create his new projects and everything. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of good things in this one as well.
Yeah, and it's sort of important to know that, like, I don't think any university like truly means to be teaching it that way, but it because they obviously have to teach a lot of things and still get around the different problems that you might incur, and like how to think about architecture. I think what so often gets mistaught in that part of the universities are just that, like, someone came up with these ideas, and why did they come up with these ideas in the first place? And what kind of problem were they trying to solve? And that's what matters, not the actual patterns in themselves. Like, why do you learn recursion, for instance? It's not because recursion is some noble, discrete thing that I really believe that you should be taught about, but it's because you should know about, like, oh, what if you're dealing with a problem that looks recursive? Oh, you should think of like queues and stacks and like, how, having an in condition. That sort of thing. That's why you're talking about recursion, I believe. Not because you need to learn recursion for itself. And so it's like it's important to it's similar to how you learn mathematics. It's important to understand why you're learning the thing, not just like apply the thing. You shouldn't naively apply it. So I think it's good that they both show it.
Yeah, definitely good stuff. Okay, real quick, we have 2 minutes left before we need to stop this recording. So real quick, let me share mine. So I'm going to share 2 parking garage related games back to back. So last week I talked about Walliver's parking rally circuit, which is a fantastic game. I've been having a lot of fun with it over the past couple of days. This one, Parking World Build and Manage, where you actually manage a parking garage. I wanted to bring this up because this is by developer Binary Impact, who are the people who create the Unity Tips trading cards.
Yeah, no, I recognize it now.
So I think they told me their game was supposed to release today, the day that we're recording, but it doesn't look like it has actually been released. So we'll see if it ends
might
up
be
coming out
released
in the next.
at the time that
hopefully,
it's out.
Hopefully it is out. Otherwise, go wishlist it. I'll have a link in the description below. A lot of good guys over there at Binary Impact. If you couldn't tell by the Parking World Garage, they're German guys. So Yeah, they talked about, they were telling me about some of the interesting things that they did for developing this game. So, yeah, check out Parking World Build and Manage. Okay, so anyways, with that, we can go ahead and close out our show real quick here. Really do just want to thank our Patreon supporters, especially those at the CPU register tier and higher. So thank you very much to eCool and Hakan for your support over there. We really do appreciate it. And yeah, go check out the Patreon and YouTube stuff for additional bonuses. Danny, any parting words for us?
Nope. Speed on.
Speed on. All right, everybody, take care. We'll see you in the next one.